So I hope this can work. For some reason, I still see my screen a bit frozen, but let's go on. So it's a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm going to talk about the competition aspects very quickly, about competition among big tech. So my perspective is not about platforms in general, but about big technological platforms in particular. And because there is many cases at stake recently, let me make a disclaimer that I don't do any consultant work either for or against these big tech platforms, and nor I'm aware that my institution receives money from them. This is also an opportunity to take you through my personal journey as an economist that had a stint as an enforcer where I had to reassess some of my priors a little bit, which I had about platforms, which I had formed over time. And then I saw a couple of differences between, theory and practice. There was some disconnection. So when I think about big tech, and again, well, there you go. I see two different periods somehow. So when I talk about big tech, I'm going to talk about commercial internet. I'm going to talk the last 25 years of the commercial internet, maybe 30 years. And in the last 3 decades, you have somehow a first period, the first half of it, which is extremely innovative. Maybe there is a coincidence, but since I'm going to talk about competition and competition policy, also think that this initial period of incredible dynamism, disruptive innovation came along when the United States ran the last antitrust case in this area. So that was a Microsoft case in the mid to late 90s. And then the United States, until recently, effectively abdicated from intervening in the big tech sector. And so this is where, all the entrepreneurs were very familiar with Jeff Bezos and Brin and Page, and later on Zuckerberg came along. So here you got young people in Silicon Valley in the mid-90s. But then things changed. And this is where we have been a bit slow in catching up with what happened. So, and as a turning point, think about 2010, 2011, more or less. So it's been already more than 10 years. This is just, some anecdotal data points, but interesting to think about. And also how, as I said, I updated some of my priors. So this is just a simple master thesis from a student here at Imperial, Dutch. So you will see a very strange word there, which is autoverzekering, which means car insurance. And what this student was saying, just simple snapshots of what you see on the screens when you do a search. Okay, you do a search for car insurance, and 10, 15 years ago, you will see a lot of organic links and some paid stuff only at the top. By the way, sometimes it's not even clear those are paid links because these red boxes were superimposed by the student himself. So some people don't recognize it. But what this screenshot is basically saying is that over time, more and more of our attention was captured by paid ads, okay? Because that's the monetization business model of the search engine of Google. In principle, as an economist, I would have said, well, you can scroll down and you can see lots of other pages with lots of other organic links. But this is where there is one of the discrepancies I've encountered by running cases with the European Commission between theory and practice. People don't scroll down. People don't, okay? So when I was running the Google search, the Google shopping case, apologies, basically 99% of the people click either on the first or the second result they see. Okay? So this idea that people are rational, some of us are, but another lesson I learned is that when I speak to academics or very smart people, we are not representative of the overall market at all. So we don't need to think about ourselves, but we have to think about the average person. So this is, the search result is not necessarily what you're looking for, but the search result will be dictated by how much somebody is paying to have access to your attention, which is a scarce resource. That's another anecdotal data point. Yeah, this idea that the internet is a ladder to this infinite knowledge which is available out there, this amazing experience where everything is interconnected with everything else, which is true in theory, and that was the original promise of the internet. Well, this is again another data about Google once again, which tells that 2/3 of the searchers are so-called zero search zero-click searches. That is, you start from Google and you end up there. So it's not a stepping stone into something else. Okay, so maybe you already get what you wanted. I don't know, but again, I had to revise this idea that you start a journey that can go anywhere else instead. And again, relate to the business models of many of these companies. These companies try to create a moat in their own ecosystem. They want you to stay in their ecosystem as long as possible to make purchases, to send you ads, etc. And it's very difficult to get out of it. Again, Google, to talk about another idea that we had in mind as economists, but there is always competition for the market. Forget about competition in the market. Reversal of fortunes. This is data about the global dominance of Google's in search engines. As you can see, more or less 90 to 95% of the searches worldwide, forget about China, that's a different market, are on one search engine only. Okay, so 95% in Europe, for instance, it's 95% and even higher on mobile phones, because as you know, not only Android is owned by Google, but Google is also paying Apple in order to be the default search engine on their phones as well. So also on iOS, it's very difficult to promote the new search engines. I don't want to pick up necessarily only on Google. So this is Facebook. Now they call themselves Meta. So you may remember a couple of years ago, to the date, the attempted coup in Capitol Hill. Unfortunately, a few days ago, we had a similar thing in Brazil. And on the day, January 6th, when there was an attempted coup in Capitol Hill in the United States, Facebook, that was still the name at the time, announced changes of the terms of service to WhatsApp. And in particular, there was a perception, which was correct, that the level of privacy would be reduced in the United States and the rest of the world, with the exception of Europe. And there was even perhaps some misinformation. People understood there was the end of encrypted messages. But people started saying, we have to do something, okay? This thing didn't go unnoticed. We have to do something in order to change platforms. So let's try to go on Signal, perhaps, okay? Let's download Signal because we need to introduce an alternative platform. And many of us perhaps did that. Okay, but then there's a difference between downloading an app and being able to use that app. Okay, this is the actual usage in that year, 2021. And basically, so maybe you do have a Signal on your phone and you may communicate with a couple of friends. Journalists do that, but that's it. But try to convince your mother, your friends, your chat groups, etc. It's impossible. Okay, it's impossible because of network effects. So what this slide is saying is that if you add up WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, which is owned by the same company, if you remove Weixin and QQ, because this is China again, so it's that completely different market, basically nobody managed to get away from the monopoly that WhatsApp has on messaging services. And interestingly, Signal, for instance, is nowhere to be seen in actual consumption. So we have to distinguish between just downloading once an app and actually using it on a regular basis. So we had many questions by running cases. This is interesting, perhaps, for academics, since I had this experience as an enforcer. There is actually a lot of evidence which is lingering around, not from academic papers, for some reasons I will tell you in a moment, but from cases. The downside of cases is that they're very long and boring to read. There's a lot of information there, but they're not written in a way which is very user-friendly. It's not just about the EU, and recently the United States moved in that direction too, but it's also South Korea, it's also Australia, it's also the United Kingdom, it's also, there is Japan. So there are many cases. Unfortunately, they are not digested well for an academic community. So some questions there became clear that the growth of this firm, which has been incredible, was because of merit. They do supply very good products, but there is something else. If Google is so good, why do they need to impose contractual restrictions on mobile phone manufacturers to have Android? Why do they need also to pre-install all the Google suite of products and so forth? If Google is so good, why do they need to pay $10 to $15 billion a year to Apple to be pre-installed also on the Apple phone? So this is where dominant companies, and this is a theme of today's conference, have special responsibilities. So no one ever said that, pre-installing is bad per se, or paying some money to be pre-installed is a bad thing. But when you're a dominant company, you have to think twice about those kind of behaviors, those contractual restrictions. So these are the many cases that we have run. It took endless time. So Google Shopping took 7 years, for instance, which is an infinity in a dynamic world of platforms. This growth came also through mergers. So in the past 20 years, there have been in excess now of 1,000 acquisitions by the GAFAM, okay? Nobody's saying that they were all bad, but the point, and again, as economists, try to confront yourselves, not just with a theoretical argument, but the actual numbers. None of them. Now I have revised the figure because one acquisition has been challenged by the UK authority, that was Giphy when it was purchased by Facebook. But 1,000 to 0 or 1,001 to 1, these are numbers that don't strike as good numbers. So everything, and more importantly, about 97 to 98% of these acquisitions, they were not even vetted by anyone. So for various reasons. So we tried in Europe at least to challenge some of this behavior especially on the behavioral side, on abuse of dominance side through cases. But it took, as I said, a long time, which is not compatible with the dynamics of the industry. So now we are still discussing about remedies in those cases that basically the competitors were dead 10 years ago, and you cannot go back in time, and competition has been lost almost forever. And this is also something which I encountered personally. And it's not surprising for an economist because of the asymmetric stakes. There's lots of money on one side, and then you have regulators that, yes, they should be having responsibilities, but they're also struggling with lack of resources. And so in the end, you've got the best advocates, the best economists, the best consultants always working on one side only. And academia is often not present in these cases. Still, we can do something. So what can policymakers do, and what can we do as academics? So policymakers, and Jacques already mentioned this, are basically shifting from the insuccess of exposed application of competition policy for several reasons to application of ex-ante regulation. And this is not surprising if you think these are industries where there are behavioral issues on the demand side, there is huge fixed costs, so entry is difficult, there are network externalities. These are industries from an economic point of view where competition is not expected to work fine. Okay, so it's a situation you would expect at some stage to some ex-ante regulator to come in force, which is what we're trying to do in Europe right now, and which is what China actually did before anyone else. So China has already enacted something very similar to what's in the DMA now. I call this traditional tools because although comparisons are always difficult to make, we have managed to introduce, say, some competition in telecoms, which has network effects, huge investments. It has a different political dimension because telecoms still are within national boundaries. Instead, these platforms are supranational, which is a very important topic to think about. But in telecoms, for instance, I am based in the UK. There are 4 mobile operators. The situation is okay. If I dislike Vodafone, say, which is one of the incumbents here, and I want to go on another operator, I keep my number. I can talk to anyone else on any platform. I keep also my contacts. I mean, imagine instead the problem I started with when I mentioned about Signal, you cannot keep, your contacts, you cannot talk to them, you cannot be interconnected. So some of the principles, especially the contestability principle, is not a regulation on prices, but is a regulation trying to give competition a chance. Okay, and I think as a principle is something where I hope there is agreement. Something also that I've proposed many times, and it's more of a legal issue, but it's very important in practice. Currently, the discussion, especially in antitrust, is focused in the wrong direction. What do I mean by that? I said earlier, there is really a resource issue. Okay, so regulators don't have a lot of resources they can play around with. They cannot fight too many battles at the same time. However, most of the discussion is at the initial stage that from the legal point of view, you have to define what's the relevant market. There is an obsession in antitrust circles with the relevant market, which are very elusive in digital platforms, yet resources, real resources, months and months and people, dozens of people are working. What is the relevant market? Is Google dominant there? And it's the wrong type of discussion, I think. I think I would be much more draconian and say, go back, and this is where my field, industrial organization, hasn't been very helpful. Go back a little bit in time, reintroduce some imperfect structural presumptions. When you are Google, when you have 80% market share at least, when you have, take some imperfect metric. Every metric will be imperfect, in my opinion, but it's better than what we couldn't do in the past 20 years. And when you have this kind of size and importance, structural importance in the economy, I will presume that you cannot, for instance, purchase another company. You don't need to purchase another company, yet again, gobble up a potential rival, despite all the uncertainties around it, because you have the resources to do it yourself. You can do it. Why on earth do you need to buy yet another one when you are the most almighty company? This is the structural presumption that I would reintroduce only for a limited set of players. But then there is the rebuttable bit. And the rebuttable bit is I will say this is bad. And I can also do this be special with certain behaviors, unless you prove me, you Google or Facebook or Amazon, whatever, you prove me that you really need that action or that merger, etc., to do something that otherwise you couldn't do, and it's going to be beneficial to consumers. Okay? This is the rebuttable part. So I hope you can see that all the discussion will avoid this endless, time, effort and money burning exercise that the regulators are doing, and instead we would concentrate on the real meat. But it would be the companies that would have to bring some evidence to the regulator in order to discuss about the evidence and why a certain merger or a certain behavior is to be done. What can academics do? I still have another slide and then I'm done. The problem of academics that we've encountered is that basically we got stuck. We got stuck to where we were 20 years ago when we developed the theory of two-sided markets. If you think about the policy debate of some people now, is still where we were 20 years ago. So these platforms, network externalities, they are great. They create markets. This is fantastic. It's efficient. However, this comes potentially with the cost of monopolization. Okay. So, and this debate was there 20 years ago. The debate is still there now. And so it's an empirical matter. So you would have hoped that progress could have been made on the empirical side. But this is the downside. The downside is when it comes to these big companies, they never gave data, especially on the competition side, to independent academics for an evaluation. So it's been very, very difficult to obtain anything. So just look at the top 5 journals in the profession in the past 20, 25 years. Despite the relevance and the interest in the topic, try to count how many articles have been published with primary data coming from Google, Facebook, or Amazon, or Microsoft, whatever. Okay, Microsoft is a bit of an exception because they have a cultural difference. They have the Microsoft labs where they do research. So the big tech problem is that they don't give data. De facto, they don't. Okay, and then there is the Uber problem. Sometimes there are some platforms which are willing to give data. Uber is there. It's a case in point. There are many people with Uber. Uber is not one of the dominant companies, by the way. However, Uber gives data to some researcher only if somehow the research question is preordained. So you already know where the question is going to get to. So there's a famous paper, for instance, and this I've been discussing, for instance, with Luigi Zingale, as you might have heard in other settings, where Uber was accused of discriminating between female and male drivers. And so they gave data to very good economists at the Chicago University who actually did a data analysis, and they said, no, it's actually that the male drivers drive faster. So they don't earn more, but they just have more rights. They can have more rights in a given point of time. That's why they earn more. There is no discrimination. As an economist, you would immediately say, okay, but if I drive faster, is it going to create a higher risk of accident? Is there a trade-off? No, that's an interesting economic question. Did that induce some moral hazard, some behavior that was not good for welfare? But when the same academics asked Uber, can we also analyze that aspect? Uber said, no, you cannot look at that. You can only look at one aspect of the story, and we're not going to tell you anything else about the rest. And this is not acceptable, because this partial evidence, of course, will always be put and packaged in a way which is beneficial to the companies, and you want to know more. There is hope, okay? In Europe, for instance, there's an academic community as part of the DSA, not the DMA, the Digital Services Act. There is a provision, which is, I think, Article 18. I'm very bad with these things, which oblige actually the companies which are subject to regulation to release data to academics for research purposes. So you have to get gear for that and make sure that the interfaces are done well, make sure that the anonymization of data is done well, because it's an opportunity, but it can also be a wasted opportunity if data are collected in the wrong way and if they cannot be transferred in a good way. There's also a true call for interdisciplinarity, because here we're talking about privacy, we're talking about stuff which is not the typical realm of economists. My view, again, very personal, perhaps parochial, but I have observed a tendency, maybe it's the typical way we are trained, of economists of looking at the flaws of regulations, okay? GDPR is a case in point. Let's look at the cost to firms that they cannot advertise. But regulators are not silly people. Regulators introduce sometimes regulation for a reason. No? They want to make sure that our privacy is protected. And for a reason or whatever, I don't see really a lot of interest in trying to understand the benefits of regulation as well. So for instance, I haven't seen many papers on looking whether people feel more protected by GDPR, just looking at the commercial aspect of GDPR, which is again a partial view. Fine to look at one aspect only, but let's be broader. When I speak to privacy experts, especially on the legal side, though, I clash with another problem, because they say, you economists want to quantify everything. That's your problem. I don't know if it is a problem. I think it's a good thing to try to quantify something. It's informative. However, they tell me, which is something I can relate to emotionally, when they tell me privacy is a fundamental right. But then I need them to explain me, what does that mean? What does it mean? How can I introduce that legal important concept of rights into an economic framework? And this is something which has not been done. So this discussion has to be two-way and useful. We need to change vantage point. I will conclude, though, because this is a panel of very distinguished people and researchers which are still very active in this area, with a call to try now and then, and this is also one of those occasions, to do something different and to try to change really vantage point by looking beyond where we are now. So, because in the end, and I find it intellectually sometimes not too satisfactory, we're always talking about the same stuff. We're talking about, apps, advertisers, platform. It's always that. That's where we are. And instead, and I don't know if this makes any sense, but let me try to say it anyway. Let's try to ignore for once Google and Amazon and Facebook or Meta. Let's try to ignore them for one. Let's try to talk among ourselves, but also with people from other disciplines, about where we would like to be 10 years from now when it comes to our social relations, the way we shop online, the way we are informed online. Let's try to think about our digital future. There will be a variety of opinions, okay, of course, but only by putting ourselves, and of course, in this digital future, there will be Google, there will be Amazon, there will be all of those, but we can be more ambitious, no? Because we will see that there may be something that we are not thinking about yet, and we can try to figure out how we want our digital future to be shaped, because only in that way then we can find solution also for our digital present. Thank you very much.